But without further ado, I want to introduce the reason we're all here, which is Bryan Roth. Bryan is a writer who lives in Durham, North Carolina, who's been recognized by the North American Guild of Beer Writers with a best blog for his site, This Is Why I'm Drunk, which, let's be honest, like as a guy who thinks he writes about beer, that's the best beer blog name I've come across. He has covered the beer industry for nearly a decade with reporting on business, cultural, and personal stories. His writing has been recognized multiple times by the North American Guild of Beer Writers, which he now runs as a director. His work has been included in print and digital publications, including Good Beer Hunting, Beer Advocate, All About Beer, Thrillist, Paste, and more. We are absolutely delighted to be hosting Bryan today, so please join me in welcoming him to the stage.
Hello. It's very exciting to apparently be in a living wake for this building right now. So thank you for joining me on this journey. Thank you to everyone who is organizing. I would probably be remiss if I should ask for another round of applause for all the volunteers and people working really, really hard tonight, who are doing an amazing job. So thank you to everybody. Thank you to the Guild for having me, and thank you to you guys for joining me on this incredible adventure of charts and storytelling and beer and hard seltzer, because we can't avoid that. So I'm going to try to do this in 40 minutes. Stick with me, because I want to do Q&A, because I love doing Q&A. I'd love to hear what you guys think and what you might be curious about. I have 100 slides to go through, so put me on the clock. Real quick, this is me, by the way. If you want to tweet, contact me, slide into my DMs, email me. We're all adults. You can choose what you want. Bryan D. Roth is me. I'm going to have a whole bunch of slides, so if there's anything you want to follow up with or ask me about, please, I encourage you, get back in touch, because I'll have a lot. The idea behind tonight, of course, so I am a freelance journalist. I've been covering the beer industry for a while. And I am both in love with storytelling and charts, of which you'll get a lot of tonight. But the core of all of it comes from this guy, Plato. A lot of what he focused on in terms of his philosophical teachings came from this idea of the value and importance of stories. And even in the Republic, where Socrates, his own philosopher, was speaking with a variety of people about the ideas of learning and philosophy, storytelling is at the core of it all. This is right at the beginning of the text, where he's talking about how important the idea of education through stories is, and the value of stories too. And so I think it's impossible to talk about beer and the changing beer landscape without including the idea of storytelling, the themes behind it that can match up with data to give us a better context of what exactly is going on. If anybody's familiar with Joseph Campbell, this is one of his big works that is kind of ubiquitous. It's called The Hero's Journey. Joseph Campbell, writer, academic, mythologist. He focused on this idea that every time we would have some kind of heroic story, it would go through a similar path, a cyclical experience where our hero would be called to whatever that adventure may be, go through a whole host of transformation before he returned back to the beginning, but as a hero and changed. And of course, the only way to tell this is through the best story ever told, Star Wars: A New Hope. So I want to hit on this real quick just to give a sense of when we talk about storytelling. There are pieces here that I think you can always connect to what you're doing in your business, whether it's creating brands or talking to people about what you're doing. So we're going to fly through these because I'm assuming everybody is familiar with Luke Skywalker and Star Wars. The beginning of every journey is the call to adventure. In this case, it's R2-D2 showing up, playing the message, Obi-Wan's going to be the only hope. Luke comes across him, and that leads him to Obi-Wan, who functions at a supernatural aid. So this is the person who's providing wisdom and training. And guiding toward what is going to be the next step in each part of the journey. And the way that a hero gets to that next step is crossing the threshold. So there's something that ends up pushing this hero to what's next in his journey. In this case, he's off with Obi-Wan and the droids. The Empire comes in and kills his beloved aunt and uncle. And all of a sudden, he's thrust on what's going to be an intergalactic adventure to save the galaxy, right? And he teams up with Chewie and Han. They go on adventures. He gets to know what they're doing, and they all team up. They're going to rescue Leia. Death and rebirth. This is the transformation. So this is the middle point of the hero's journey where something's happening in which he's going to come out on the other side. This is pushing him in that direction toward what he ultimately sees as his destiny. They're in the trash compactor here. They escape death. And ultimately, that gets Luke to understanding the Force. He joins the Rebels. He attacks the Death Star. That works out great, as we all know. And there they are. They've won the day. They returned home. He's a hero. He's using the Force. Everyone's happily ever after. He even gets a medal, except for Chewie. Chewie does not get a medal. I don't know if you guys ever noticed that. 2 medals, Han and Luke, not Chewie. The all was correct. He worked really hard. And so what does this have to do with beer? I promise you I will figure this one out. We'll do this together. And ultimately, what this does, I think, is it brings together this idea of how important storytelling can be and how we should think about it, and how there's always an opportunity to consider what story is alongside what we might otherwise think of as just kind of like a plain economic or transactional thing, like selling beer itself, because there's always so much more to it, right? And this comes about from the idea that we exist every day in a constant state of storytelling. We are surrounded by stories every day. When we're at work, we might be daydreaming. It might be to avoid work, or we just get lost in something we're doing. When we're talking with friends or loved ones, we're telling stories or memories or experiences. When we go to bed at night, we're dreaming in our head our own stories. We are surrounded all the time by stories. And there's an easy way to bring that into what we do, because the way that we tell stories and hear them and interact with them psychologically leads to a variety of pieces that ultimately brings us together as a community too, because when we tell stories, there are a few core things that happen. So it's not just you hear a thing about Luke Skywalker joining the Rebels and saving the galaxy. There is shared language that we learn. We hear certain things and we can connect those. And it connects to our emotions. But ultimately, here's the important part, is that when we share in a story, if we were to all sit down and watch Star Wars together, we're all experiencing the same story at the same time, and we have a shared experience. Chances are we're probably thinking about very similar things in the exact moment, too. And so there is a lot to consider when we're talking about stories, which to me is great, but it's also a situation where someone who loves to talk about the quantitative reasoning behind a lot of decisions, sometimes those numbers don't do it all. And that we need to have stories in order to connect the things that we're talking about, whether it's a quantitative sense or otherwise, is that, we can have good science, but if we can't relay this in a way that helps people understand, it meets their needs and desires as a human being, we can only get halfway. If you think about it in terms of if you're on an airplane and you get turbulence, statistically you're going to be fine. You have a lot of reasoning to tell you nothing's going to happen, but there's still that brief moment, that emotive moment where you might get that, oh crap. And no matter how much we think about numbers or know things in a definitive context, we can't always rely on statistics to relieve our anxieties. So that's why we're going to cross the threshold together here. We're going to start our own hero's journey. And what better way to start with it than one of the biggest stories in craft beer, American for sure. I know there's been getting some attention here in Canada as well. This may seem a little bit familiar here. You may recognize it, that you see this, something about craft lager. Literally every month almost for the last 6 months, there's been something in the U.S. about what's going on with craft lager. It is one of the 5 hottest beer trends in 2019. It is one of the 7 trends to watch in 2019. It is one of the 8 craft beer trends of 2019. It is all of the things. It is everywhere, and you can't avoid it. These are the narratives and stories that we're telling, but here's the thing. when we're thinking about lager, we assume that at this point, lager is ruling everything around us and that we cannot miss craft lager. But let's look at the numbers and see what we can find, right? Okay, so this is IRI. This is a market research company based in the U.S. It follows scan data from grocery and chain stores. American lager, this is American craft lager, volume growth by percentage over the course of 2015 to 2018. It's neck and neck with IPA. That's pretty good, right? And if we go a little bit closer to Vancouver here, this is Seattle and Tacoma and Portland, where, yeah, that's pretty good, right? This is, again, volume growth by percentage. American craft lager against IPA in terms of what that volume growth is. Well, here's the thing, is that in both these places, IPA sells 5 times more volume in Seattle, Tacoma. In Portland, it sells 3 times more volume. If you look across the U.S., IPA sells 7 times more volume in these stores than craft lager. This just gives you a brief idea of where things are with these categories alone. When you put it in this list, it is 6th. But if you read all the stories about all of these amazing things that are happening right now and changing the world of craft beer, you'd think this wasn't the case. Now, it is also the most popular beer in the world. So is it a case where, is it growing? Yes. Is it a transformative thing within the world of beer? Sure. We have American craft breweries, Canadian craft breweries who are focusing on this style and bringing it to more people who are drinking it. But the whole point is that when we look at this, it's very clear that craft lager still has a way to go and that the narrative doesn't always match up with the numbers. It's not to say that it should be avoided or ignored, but we also have to think about the broader context. Okay, so let's take this revelation and we'll go into transformation, right? So we're on the journey here. Okay, so when we think about what we hear and what we believe in, a lot of that comes from those of us around us. It always starts with somebody else, right? Look at this jerk. This is me in a lager sweatshirt at the Great American Beer Festival on TV. Somebody decided to do that. So I am part of the problem, but this also gets to the point, right? Is that we are constantly perpetuating the story, whether it's true or false or some combination of the two. There's always something else going on. So it was hard to miss that because ultimately a lot of what we do is going to be built around the people that we surround ourselves with. That it's easy to get excited about the things that we see that confirm our beliefs. And there's nothing wrong with that. That we are wired as human beings psychologically and emotionally to get excited about that and recognize that. Because so much of what we see and believe in comes from this idea of trusting those around us. It could be our friends, a newspaper, a TV station. These are all aspects of social trust. And they come from stories. So, the big thing for us, I think, classy, this week, There we go. The big thing for us over the next few days is that when you're thinking about things, whether it's tonight or tomorrow during seminars, or even if it was earlier tonight with Crystal talking about the way that we talk about beer, take this opportunity to think about what you're learning from somebody else and how you're using that information. Okay, so here we go. Here comes all the fun stuff. We're going to start talking trends and numbers. This is from the U.S. This is per capita ethanol consumption because this plays into a very prominent story in the U.S. right now with the trouble that beer is facing. A lot of popular stories, not just craft lager, deal with the idea of what American craft breweries have to face with in terms of wine and spirits. And looking at this chart, it's kind of hard, right? So this is 50 years worth of data, and beer has an upswing in the mid to late 90s, and it's going back down. And when we look at this, this is share of servings. So this is based on alcohol content, because you can't just do a straight ounces to ounces, liters to liters, gallons to gallons kind of thing, because the alcohol content is different. Beer right now, this is going back 50 years. Beer is at its lowest point in 50 years in the U.S. for share of servings. And that's been a long-term thing that's been coming on in terms of the way people are thinking about alcohol, their drinking, their consumer. And this leads to 2 very interesting points when we're talking about the story of what's happening, is that for drinkers, it is the best time alive to be drinking beer or anything else. For businesses, it is the hardest time ever to be selling beer. And it leads to us thinking about these things like share of throat and the way people are talking about beer, wine, spirits, seltzer, cider, etc. And here in Canada, so there's a similar pattern. So this is per capita liters, and this is, you can see it's on the slow downswing, and there's a lot of reasons behind this. What is the story behind what's going on in Canada? And we'll also take a look at some in British Columbia, too. So if we're looking at the absolute volume of sales, so beer, again, we've got spirits, wine, beer on the bottom. We see a slow decline here in beer. And just to help make this a little bit clearer, so beer has lost about 10% in this chart. Wine has gained about 8.5%. Spirits about 1.5%. This is beer specifically. And so this may not surprise you in terms of the stories that you hear from your customers or from your friends and family. A lot of this has to do with two big things. One, demographics. People are getting older, which is going to change how they drink. Things are also getting more expensive. So the important thing in this story is that there are factors that go into what's happening with beer, that it's not just about one category or the other anymore, is that it's not just I'm a beer person, I'm a wine person, I'm a spirits person. It's that people are focusing on experiences now and flavor, and you can get that from a whole host of things. And that, to me, has been the story of 2019, especially when we think about the continued decline of beer in America. And you can see the differences here in Canada, too. But the rise of hard seltzer, or the way people are talking about non-alcoholic, or mocktails, things like that. To give you an idea, just in terms of pricing, so spending has gone up about 30% in Canada. This is the Consumer Price Index. So beer itself, so this kind of measures the overall price of things. Beer has gone up about 13% in its Consumer Price Index. Wine, however, about 3.5%. Spirits, about 6%. And if you look at the U.S., too, you can see a similar thing. So the top blue line is total gallons of alcohol. Beer is kind of like petered off a little bit. We've kind of hit a little plateau. And this is happening at the same time as wine and spirits are starting a very slow upswing. So this makes for a very volatile situation for beer in the U.S., but you can also see this in Canada. This is going to be the year-to-year volume growth period per capita. Okay, 1999 through 2018. During this time frame, the average annual growth rate per capita was -1%. And you can see the way it fluctuates up and down. There was a high of 3.4% for Canada in 1999. The high was 3.2% for British Columbia in 2007. And to bring this back to the idea of storytelling is that across the board in North America, you see stories about people drinking less, changing their decisions as it relates to alcohol, which is true. But you are also getting an idea of, perhaps more importantly, people drinking differently. And this is really important because over the course of the last 20 years in the U.S., on the left we have the gallons of alcohol consumed, on the right the number of servings. So this is coming back to what we were talking about with beer on this kind of arc going downward. So the amount of gallons consumed has been between 7 and almost 8 billion pretty much throughout this time frame. Servings has gone up from 107.5 billion to almost 137 billion servings overall. But this is marked by alcohol content, which, if you want to look at this combined with the idea of that other slide, is that this deals with premiumization. People are drinking higher alcohol things, they're spending more money on it, and this is changing ultimately the way that they think about their interaction with the products they buy, whether it's at a bar or a restaurant or a store. In 2008 through 2017, spirits in terms of servings grew, this is in the U.S., 26%. Wine grew 16%. Beer declined 4%. So it's easy to see what's going on here in terms of these now kind of long-term trends. And in the U.S., historically, the percentage of people who are drinking alcohol does not change. Now, based on raw numbers of legal drinking age adults, that number kind of ticks up. But it's pretty much 2/3 of people. Did we get there? There we go. About 2/3 of people drink alcohol at some point. And that has been consistent for a very long time. This goes back to 1948, I believe. And so taking all these things together, the idea is that it's not just that people might be drinking less, but also that they're drinking differently. And to give a sense of growth, too, and the way that this is playing out in beer specifically, so this is in Canada. So this is the amount of domestic hectoliters sold versus the number of breweries in the country, and this looks a lot like what you see in the U.S., too, that this hook right here is pretty much the same. And so it creates this very interesting situation where breweries specifically are starting to think differently about the way that they're interacting with customers and the way that they're making beer, too, which has led us to the Better For You movement. Right? This slide is one of my favorite that I've ever seen because this explains so much of what's going on right now. This is a Gallup poll. So at this point, we're going back to 2000. The top line is people, what they say they want to lose weight. The bottom line is they're actually trying to lose weight. America. The thing is, so like the effort that you have to put forward, so we're talking about diet and exercise and changing a lot of things in your life, which is not easy. There's a lot of things that go in to actually shedding pounds. But this also helps to give a little bit of background to the story of what is going on with the Better For You category. Because this is Michelob Ultra. This is kind of like set the tone for where we are right now in U.S. craft beer for 2019, some of the hotter stories. So Michelob Ultra in 2012 was selling 2.2 million barrels worth of product in grocery and chain stores alone. Year to date, through the end of September, it sold 4.6 million barrels, which is the, if you take Sierra Nevada, New Belgium, Sam Adams, and Yuengling, combine them all, and then multiply it by 2.5 times, that's the amount that Michelob Ultra sold in these stores. So when you think about the Better For You movement, it's perhaps no surprise then that we have a lot of imitation beers. So these are all various forms of craft beer, which are all playing in this kind of Better For You space. We've got Southern Tier here on the left. There's Oscar Blues, which is throughout the U.S., based out of Colorado, Harpoon in Massachusetts, Dogfish, Abita. These are all beers that exist somewhere around 100 calories. They're about 4% ABV. But let's think about this for a second in terms of storytelling. Is that if you have a consumer that's telling you, I'm in a transformative period right now, is that I'm on my journey, and I need to think about what's best for me, maybe I'm not ready to put in the work, but I still want my beer. But what can you do for me? So this call to adventure for them is, can you lose weight? Beer is the supernatural aid. This is the way it plays here, right? The breweries are the ones who are helping them move along their journey to try to figure out, okay, you want to lose weight. Well, you're not going to go run that 5K, but maybe, 100 fewer calories in your beer at night might help. And one of the biggest transformations around the lower ABV space, that Better For You category, has been lower alcohol. These are a few headlines I pulled. The one in the middle is an actual headline. It was included in one of the biggest beer stories of 2019. This is not just craft lager. But this gives you an idea. This is also getting a lot of play in the U.S. Everything's low ABV right now, right? Michelob Ultra, seltzers, this has got to be the case. Well, this is also from, here we go, Social Standards. This is a market research company. And so they're looking at Instagram posts. So we have news stories. This is social media. They parse Instagram posts, and they show that definitively low alcohol is going up. Well, it's not. Here is Brewers Association defined craft beer. On the right here is 7% and up. That is growing in IRI grocery convenience stores the most. In the middle is 5 to 7%. That's growing about 3%. Below 5% is negative in growth. So when we talk about low ABV being one of the biggest stories in the country right now, well, let's not get ahead of ourselves. Now, a lot of this might have to do with the fact that IPAs pretty much dominate the American scene, as it does in other places too. But here's the situation. If you look at the IRI sales data, is that regardless of style, if it's IPA or non-IPA, the top 20 brands sold in the U.S., which is a lot of volume during this time period, both went up in ABV. Same thing if you want to look at Brewers Association Defined Craft or the National Beer Wholesalers Association, which is a trade group that represents the middle tier in the U.S. This is all going up. So here's the thing. This is literally 2 slides away from that other one in this presentation from Social Standards. This is clearly showing that the narrative does not match the numbers. Something is not matching up here. So we can look at this also from the perspective of, okay, so we know now that low ABV, while there's interest, sure, and while there are more products, absolutely, higher ABV actually holds pretty much across everything that's going on right now in alcohol in the U.S. So beer we see is up. The weighted ABV of spirits is up. Kombucha, which naturally has some amount of alcohol in it, is now being sold as 7.5% alcohol hard kombucha. Hard seltzer, which started as White Claw and Truly 5%, begat Natural Light Seltzer 6%, which brought you Pabst 8%, which brought you Four Loko 14%. When people look at white space, it's not just low ABV. It is high ABV, and it's working. And so we would go back. When we go back to this, there we go. Is that they admit. So this is that same slide a couple slides over. Is that oh wait, no, it's not actually impacting anything. It's not doing this. So what is? So what is impacting the way that people think about and drink beer? I want to note for you real quick that if you look at the bottom here, low ABV is the last thing. High ABV is above that. So this is from a poll from Nielsen in partnership with the Brewers Association asking a weekly craft drinker that defines itself. A craft drinker is someone who has drank craft beer at several points throughout a year. But you can see that trend line holds, right? Which now if we use this to think about the broader stories of what's going on in terms of other brands and products in the industry. Because if we're talking about better for you, that is not going to work. Well, that's White Claw, and that's a tennis ball, because what else are you going to put next to White Claw, right? Okay, so if we're talking about better for you, we talk about hard seltzer. Hard seltzer has been nuts in the U.S. this year. And a lot of people have been talking about it in terms of, oh man, 2019, can you believe what's going on with hard seltzer? That's not true. Hard seltzer's been around since 2013. It's been selling tens of millions of dollars worth of product since 2016. It's now hundreds of millions of dollars. It's now a billion-dollar category. But the thing is that there's so much more to this story that no one's talking about, which explains why it is a thing in the first place. So value-added water, which is also a thing. So if we think about it's non-bottled water, so this could be electrolytes or flavors or things like that, is consistently one of the best-selling packaged products in grocery stores in the U.S. RTD coffee, which is not alcoholic, that's just ready-to-drink coffee, canned, which is very, very popular right now in the U.S. That went from like 0 to 60, so that's why it's high up there in growth. But value-added water, as one of the largest categories in the U.S., continues to grow at a rapid clip. This is tap water consumption. To give you an idea, if you look at this spike in the middle right there, that's the recession. So you might have an idea already. Maybe I've already relayed this story, and we're all working together right now and assuming what it is. You're right. It's because the recession, people change their spending habits, and that's when you see the spike in people actually drinking tap water. With the exception of this period in time, bottled water specifically grew every year in volume from 1977 to 2018 as a category as a whole. So, this is, again, non-alcoholic. This is just seltzers. Together, this is a $3.1 billion category right now. It's always growing, too. But if you think about the typical behavior of someone who's drinking these products, you have to also then think about the rest of that story. You have to think about what happens to them during the day. If they're drinking a couple of LaCroix, and this is just normal habit for them, what happens when they go home? If they've already had 2 or 3, maybe it's just easy for them to have a third or a fourth, and it has some booze in it because they want to have something as they're winding down. This is the leading collection of hard seltzer brands in the U.S. This is 13 in total, but if we want to be honest about it, it's pretty much like 2018, 2019 is the majority. That's why you see a big swing right there. But 2 million barrels, year to date, end of September. The amount of hard seltzer that's being sold in grocery and convenience stores is the same amount that Sam Adams sells annually, everywhere. Airports, bars, restaurants, stores. This is hard seltzer. It is now a $1 billion category, probably like literally right now. This month it was going to cross $1 billion for the first time in the U.S. But you need to consider, again, what that story is of this category, is that if people are thinking about this in terms of their transformative process, and they want to do something that they perceive to be better for them, even though they are still putting alcohol into their bodies, they're trying to do this in a way that feels good to them. And a lot of businesses are seeing that as an opportunity. And in a time when we have difficulty for breweries and selling beer against wine, spirits, hard seltzer, this is a way that people can be a part of that story. That there's interest in these different kinds of experiences that provide people what they're looking for. And hard seltzer, it's easy, right? Like I don't know if you guys have had any hard seltzers, but there's like a low barrier to entry. It's 5%, unless you're Four Loko, and it's 14%. So you can have a couple. It's by the pool. They're easy. So let's think about the story behind those numbers too. So hard seltzer at the bottom there, last year in 2018 was 39%. It took a jump of 23% of what craft beer drinkers are drinking. Because when we talk about being a beer person or a wine person or a spirits person, that doesn't really exist anymore. And a lot of that is because of the change in interest in demographics. The younger drinkers don't see the lines that were once drawn back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, of which if we look at both Canadian and American data, there is this slow move down the line. So, if we think about this, let's start on a return process and figure out how we can think about being a part of this story and acting as a spiritual aid. What's working? What's changing? Okay. So these are a few things that have caught my eye in terms of stories that I've told and things that I've talked to people about recently. This is cans versus bottles. You've got some examples downstairs at the showroom floor of where this is happening. If you want to learn more, they can obviously help you out. I was talking with Xander down at Vessel about this just 45 minutes ago. Is that this is 17 to 18% growth. Cans are it, right? This is Canada. This is British Columbia. Cans again. And this matches up with what we see in the U.S. This is 52 weeks, so this is the 52-week period ending midsummer, but again, glass versus cans. Now, I want to be clear that glass, in terms of volume, sells so much that cans, it's impossible to take it over in terms of absolute volume. But when we're talking about what's growing, this is a combination of things. There are new breweries entering the market in cans. There are mobile canning units that offer these new opportunities. Packaging became a lot easier when mobile canning came around, and that happened to be the decision that a lot of people were making. But that also feeds into the broader story of now people set an expectation of cans. If we look back 40 years ago, the worry about cans was, there's BPA, or there's something wrong with that can. No one's thinking about that anymore. They're thinking about, if you talk to other brewers, and I know I have, in the course of telling a lot of stories, they're always talking about, there's the environmental impact, which is true. There's the portability impact, which is true. But there's also a consumer expectation that's becoming more and more common. This is volume growth of the kinds of packs. This is, again, in the U.S. for IRI data. 24-pack is unique. That's why it shows a lot of growth, just because it didn't really exist before. The one I want to draw your attention to, though, is 15-packs. Founders, which is out of Michigan, pretty much set the tone for that a few years ago. They saw that there was a white space in the market. 12-packs have been around forever, but they started selling 15-packs at the price essentially as the same as 12-packs. And that now is 3/4 of their packaged beer business is 15-packs. AB InBev, seeing an opportunity, is switching their 12-packs to 15-packs. And that's both an opportunity in terms of what people are expecting, and there's a value play there. If you can put beer in a 15-pack of cans and sell it for the price of 12 packs, that's a pretty good spot to be in. But regardless, you look across the bottom here, everything's growing, right? Another thing that I think is really important to talk about that we can't ignore is the changing demographics of beer, or beer drinkers. And so this is from the National Survey on Drug Use and Health. The question was if you've consumed alcohol in the past month. So men have traditionally been a high number, as you can see. From 2002 to 2017, the men answering positively to this question dropped by 2 percentage points. Women increased by about 4%. Now, that doesn't sound like a lot, but if you're kind of extrapolating that across a population, this is a really big deal. And this isn't just, this is a U.S. survey, but you could look at countries, Canada included, and see the way things are changing. It's not just, especially when we're talking about craft beer, it's not just white guys anymore. Growth here, it's everything that's not white men, which is awesome. In the U.S., these are categories that have been underserved and not focused on for a really long time. And the idea of diversity and inclusion in a whole host of ways is really important. And that's also where growth is coming from in terms of people who are consuming alcohol. It is not just an idea of being good business owners and stewards of your community, because the flip side of that, and people have been very open about it, that yes, it's important for you as a small business owner to reflect the community you're in and welcome everybody and be considerate of what that means. It's also good business sense, because you need to expand the base of drinkers. In this case, with this chart, white women was up about 2.5%. Black women were up about 3%. Hispanic men and women, obviously you can see this up. And this actually offers you a really great opportunity, because beer isn't just coming out of a store or being sold at a bar anymore. Is that we talk about third space now, which can be anything from a concert venue to a bowling alley to a brewery tap room, where people have a different experience than sitting on their couch or sitting at a bar with friends. Is that beer becomes a part of their day's story. Is that they're going to go, bowl for a perfect game, and they've got a beer there that's not just a macro beer option anymore. And so when we talk about the demographics and the way that we should be paying attention, this is it. So again, this is getting back to what's important for people. And I really want to emphasize the top 3 responses: flavor, freshness, and aroma. These are super important because of this guy. It's hazy. It's New England style IPA. This has been a really big deal in the U.S. and has changed things, both business and the way people are thinking about interacting with drinkers. There we go. So when we talk about New England IPAs, I think a lot of it is based around this idea of ingredients, specifically hops, or flavor, juicy. But there's actually a story about why this works. Nicole Garneau is an award-winning geneticist who works in Denver. This is biology. New England IPA isn't just good because it's good. It's because it literally fits within our biological preference to what we like to experience. We're wired to like New England IPA. If you think about the flavor, okay, so we've got the hops and the way that we're using it through some form of hop bursting or dry hopping, things like that. That automatically starts the process. But the creation, the density, the viscosity, this is cross-modal interaction. This is the idea that different senses will play with each other to create something new and different. So dairy companies will do this a lot with milk, where they'll add some kind of additional creaminess, because what happens is when you do that, your body's going to react differently to it. You're going to assume it's sweeter. And so if we have something like New England IPA, that is literally created as a benefit to what our taste buds want. These are the 3 leading New England IPAs in the U.S., the nationwide distribution. So it's Sierra Nevada, New Belgium, Samuel Adams. It's been a big jump. They've essentially doubled their sales in these stores this year. Year to date, through the first 3 quarters of 2019, sold about 106,000 barrels worth of product. Hazy Little Thing was up 123%. Sam Adams was up 142%. Voodoo Ranger was a paltry 26% increase versus 2018. But I want to tell you about an extreme example, too. Treehouse. I don't know if you guys are familiar. World-renowned New England-style IPA brewery in Massachusetts. So in 2018, they shared a blog post talking about their production levels. They were saying they were making 1,000 barrels a week. So let's do back-of-the-napkin math of what the story of New England IPA combined with the biological and economic aspects has done for them. So that equates to about 62,000 16-ounce 4-packs. And right now, the lowest price you can get is about $17. So we're playing in time here a little bit. But what that means is that just the money over the counter for Treehouse, based on this math, $1.1 million a week. The floor. And so, yes, there's a lot that goes on here in terms of the freshness, aroma, the flavor, the things that matter most to people when they're thinking about what they want their interaction and story to be with beer. But we also need to think about the story about our biology or our experiences or what we want. And then we can build that into the story of how we talk about these things. So yeah, we can talk about the awesome Citra hop, or we can talk about the mouthfeel. But like, what if you tell someone that, yeah, your mind is kind of wired to like this? What happens then? Or if you talk about it in the way that our biology is going to help you enjoy this more. I don't like hoppy things, right? I don't like bitter. Well, slide it across the bar. This is going to be a little different, right? So this has an impact on the broader IPA category. It has changed business models, which again comes back to this idea of storytelling. So when we think about all these things combined, if it's hard seltzer, New England IPA, the better for you movement, the change of where beer fits into people's lives. So the key here isn't just to throw something out into the market, which sometimes happens, and that's hard seltzer is one way to maybe look at that too. But in terms of building that story and making that something special, this comes from a place of authenticity, is that you can do all these things and make all these beers, but telling that story and making sure that you fit into that story with the consumer is really, really important, and that you get to be a part of their story as a consumer, as someone who enjoys alcohol. So it comes back to this idea that we are constantly building social trust. Drinker stories are changing. Your stories are changing. You have a better understanding of what this means, and now you get to be a part of that. So we're wrapping this up. Here we go. How can you fit into this idea of beer? Hero's journey, right? Call to adventure. People are looking to have a beer. There's supernatural aid. That could be you. That could be a friend. You're crossing the threshold, right? You're trying the beer. There are other kinds of alcohol and drinks that act as challenges and temptations to pull you away from beer. But ultimately, it's this transformation. It's this realization that craft beer can be something that fits within maybe who you are, or what you like to experience, or what your body tells you that you enjoy. And then people start searching out craft. They start supporting something that has intent and community, and that they can feel connected to. That becomes part of their story. That didn't work out well. Bloggy. Okay. Anyway, it's Italian. It's fine. So here are the really important things, and I'm not exaggerating in stating these sentences too, is that right now, at this time, in the history of the world, beer is more popular than ever. People appreciate beer more than ever. There is more exciting beer than ever before. And that you get to be a part of telling this greatest global story. Like right now, anywhere in the world. This is all happening right now in front of us. And telling stories and being part of the stories is really, really important. And you get to tell the story every day, and it's important to think about what that is. That's me. That's this. I'd love to talk to you more. I think I did okay on time. We've got like 15, 20 minutes. I know we started a little bit late. I'm going to be around if you want to talk, but if you guys have any questions, I'm happy to answer right now. I see a hand.
I got one.
All right.
What I was curious about is with your trajectory of beer sales versus wine versus spirits, have you ever overlaid the demographics of baby boomers to see how it relates to that?
So there has been, just in case everybody didn't hear, was asking about overlay of demographics and baby boomers as it relates to choices of alcohol content. So there has been research in the past, academic research, that focused on the way that older drinkers would trade into different kinds of alcohol, which would be going from beer into spirits or wine. I think the thing that matters most right now, too, is that those changes aren't just coming from baby boomers, is that they are coming from younger demographics who, again, are searching for certain flavor experiences. Cross-drinking is a phrase that is often used in helping to explain that, which is both true in terms of sales and anecdotal experiences, where people would go out and have a beer or another beer, whereas now they might go to a bar, have a beer, they might go to a cocktail bar, have a cocktail. A friend might not drink beer, they might have a hard seltzer. And the way that a lot of companies right now are positioning themselves with a variety of beverage alcohol, not just a beer company, I think plays into that too. So the big thing, as you're growing older, you're drinking less, yes. There might be some shifts there, yes. But again, I think we're talking about the overall large trend of beer itself. And when we have decades of showing the change, I think that certainly brings credence. Searching, I think I see hands. Yes. Hello. So there, in the U.S., there has been a long delay for doing that in chain restaurants, actually. So right now, there is no law that says Brewery X needs to provide nutritional content. It's been delayed, I think, for about 2 years at this point. The ramifications were if you were served in X number of chain restaurants, then you had to provide nutritional information, which would show calories, carbs, things like that. There is a reason why that hasn't happened, and that conversation hadn't happened until now. And I think it varies person to person in terms of if you're looking at, say, like an Applebee's or a Chili's, what that might do versus a dedicated craft consumer. But, I mean, that being the case, we have craft breweries entering grocery stores specifically labeling their beer as 100 calories, a Beta 99 calories. That's separated from their other products. So overall, can it help? Yes, especially when we're talking about people who might be specifically seeking that out, which is a growing number. But the flip side of that is also, like we saw, ABV matters in terms of what people are looking for. The higher the ABV, the better the sales in the U.S. It's an alcohol delivery system, and as much as we have reason and should celebrate all the wonderful things cocktails or spirits and wine and beer can be, and the intent and specialness that goes in behind it, for some people it is an alcohol delivery system, and they need to think about it in terms of calories and ABV and things like that. Yeah, let's do it. There's a reason I purposely left that out. Pass. So the thing, and I know Bart Watson, who presented last year, I know this is something he's talked about a lot too over the course of the last couple of years, is that there's no statistical evidence to show that it has a direct impact on beer and alcohol sales. I think people who work for cannabis marketing organizations or like trade organizations will say otherwise. As someone who focuses on data to help guide kind of the way I think about and do things, I'm probably in the camp that I need to wait and see. Especially just because the odd thing is that in the U.S., it's legal in states that are traditional progressive states for craft beer, where there's a high threshold already. And I know Bart has talked about it before, that actually in those states, craft beer is doing great. And I know this is just recent, too. It's like December this is happening in Canada as a national thing. It happened a year ago. There was some, yeah, thank you. Thank you. So, yeah, I think the cultural differences, the state-by-state differences matter, but I don't know if it's gonna be easy to say correlation causation quite yet. Wait, we're doing one over here. I saw a hand.
I was just going to say, just as a note with regard to that.
Yes.
BC Liquor Store trade symposium yesterday. That question came up about cannabis, and the response from the beer category manager was that in British Columbia, cannabis is such a mature market already because of our, prior to last year.
What are we doing here?
They do not foresee or anticipate the legalization of cannabis having any effect on alcohol sales.
Yeah, and I think to get to the point that I know Bart has made before too, like Colorado, Oregon, these are states that thrive. With thriving, long-term thriving craft beer communities too, and that has not had a drastic impact. So thank you, appreciate it. Yes, front row. So the question was about single-serve bombers and bottles. People hate them. There has been a dedicated movement over the last 5 to 6 years to move away from single-serve bomber-sized bottles. Now, a lot of breweries in the U.S. will still focus on them if they have something special, but it's been really funny because, like Allagash, if we're in Portland, Maine, if you guys are familiar, it's been a really great example of this. For a long time, they were serving in 750-milliliter bottles for their specialty barrel-aged yada yada, cool ship, whatever it may be. They now transitioned that into 12-ounce bottle 4-packs for most. They still save some of their 750 milliliters for some of their specialty seasonal things, but that was a very conscious decision. If you look at the consumer numbers in IRI, that category is just dying a painful death, as it probably deserves. I swear I'm coming back to you. Yes. Well, I think, so I say that from the perspective, that's fair. I say this from the perspective of consumers, is that as a lot of transitioning was happening as there was a lot transitioning in terms of packaging what people are buying, people were moving away from it already. And while if you want to do like a price per ounce kind of situation, obviously the larger package formats are working, but ultimately this was something that started, you don't always get this in beer necessarily. It started with consumers, and people read the tea leaves pretty quickly. I saw another one over here. Yes?
I get your use of IRI, but I know full well how limited it is in the U.S. Like, how do you think it actually affects outside of, like, the corner stores, the liquor stores, the grocery stores?
Sure. So the question was about the limitations of IRI, which, depending on who you talk to, it is what would be a minority of total beer sales. So here's why I like it. So IRI focuses on it is off-premise. So that is the chain stores, it's grocery, convenience, Walmarts, military stores. And then there is on-premise, which is bars and restaurants, own-premise, which is tap rooms. So I like IRI, one, because it is, for better or worse, the single source to get a better sense of trends, because you have lots of data. Two, it reflects average consumers. Because when we talk about craft beer lovers, we're talking about, like, in the U.S., like 1% of beer drinkers. I'm not exaggerating. So the wholesale, dedicated, craft is life people, that is a small percentage of beer drinkers. So when I look at sales numbers for styles or brands from grocery and convenience stores, this is really important, because when we see something break through like Hazy Little Thing, like this is a style that started in New England that is now sold in grocery and convenience stores around the country, that's being bought by people who didn't know what New England IPA was 2 years ago. Like 2018 was when New England IPA became a thing in grocery stores, and that's huge. So I think that is really important to try to see where those trends are, because it reflects the majority of the beer buying public. Otherwise, a lot of it is honestly talking to the breweries themselves. The Brewers Association is helpful because they have annual production information, which gives a sense. But if you want to do a real-time, of-the-minute look, which is what I try to do, IRI is the way to go. Okay, I kept you waiting. Hello. So the question was about non-alcoholic things, beer specifically. So if you look, the UK has been an interesting case study, because the number of people participating in going dry at the beginning of the year, we're in Sober October, of which I actually have a couple of friends back home in North Carolina participating in right now. So thirsty. So here's the grain of salt that I always take with that, which I, again, to put it in context of this, thinking about it in terms of the broader story at hand, is that when we talk about non-alcoholic beer or mocktails, they're coming from a place of like next to nothing. So if they're a trend that's starting out from a very, very small number. And it's also a case in the U.S., like we're presenting options that weren't there before in mass or quality. So like Athletic Brewing, which is in the U.S., and Well-Being Brewing, which are two non-alcoholic companies, have shown a lot of really great growth. And they benefit because they can sell, to get to the question about IRI, they can sell through their website because it's non-alcoholic beer. So I can see them in IRI, but I have to touch base with the owners and be like, hey, okay, so I see this is how much volume you're moving. What am I missing? Is it important to think about it in terms of a threat? Again, like I say this from my perspective of reporting and looking at numbers and thinking about it in that way, no. Is it something that is worthwhile because we see a lot more people getting into the space of alcohol or finding more locations and areas that offer things that fit in that mold? Sure. I don't know if that means that every brewery has to be running to make a non-alcoholic beer, maybe a seltzer. But yeah, it's a category that's small but growing. I wouldn't call it mighty quite yet. A couple over here. So I will say this in my best anecdotal way, because I pay attention to spirits, but obviously I don't cover it. Tequila has been really big. There was a boom. I always like half joked about Mad Men helping to bring like bourbon and whiskey back a little bit in like the mid 2000s. If you look at sales numbers, though, the one thing that isn't just specific to the type of clear or brown, flavored. Crown Royal basically got saved because they started doing apple. And like vanilla Crown Royal is huge. And so this actually gets to the broader point around flavor experiences that people look for in beer, even if you're thinking about it, New England IPA. This is giving a very specific, intense flavor experience. Flavored spirits have mattered, and for some of the larger companies, they've been really great. Woodford Reserve, which is part of the Brown-Forman group, which does Jack Daniels, has been a big deal to that company because Jack Daniels has kind of tapered off a little bit. Woodford Reserve, this gets to the premiumization part that I talked about, a higher cost spirit has been doing really, really well. So people kind of paying up and buying up along the way, too. I'm just coming back to you because I'm assuming as much if I don't see anyone. I see one behind you, though. Yeah. So just to help me clarify, is this a question about the occasions and how they're changing? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's a really interesting situation because in theory they're actually increasing. One, because of the number of places that beer may exist. So like I was talking about that third space idea where beer didn't necessarily exist before. Like in North Carolina, there are multiple barcades near me. So it's, a giant floor space with dozens of 1980s, 90s arcade games and a full-service bar. Like that didn't exist before. Bowling alleys now pay attention. It's not just Blue Moon or Bud Miller Coors. It's something that might be, a larger craft brand, things like that. But yeah, IPA's ubiquitousness is really important. It is quite literally almost the entire growth of American craft beer, if you look at styles. It's like 95% of growth came from IPA. And a lot of that's because those are what's going into the market. If you look at taproom sales, IPAs are still a big deal, but you'll find other instances because people are coming to that third space. You get people, so if you have an IPA lover who's bringing a friend who's not that into beer, but they might try like a blonde ale or a Pilsner or something like that, that could be a little different. But yeah, I think the idea of talking about it in terms of while ignoring alcohol content and price point is something that can't be ignored. And I think that's something that has existed for a while and is now becoming more important in terms of the conversation around craft. In the corner, yes.
Yeah, hi, Bryan.
Hello.
You had Roth up there with value-added water,
Yes.
and I thought that was quite striking. And I guess what I'm wondering is, so the database for that, can you clarify how confident you are that that reflects ethanol, value-added water,
That is non-alcoholic 100%. That is simply that value-added water is just it's got electrolytes, it's got flavoring. That's fun. Yes, it was behind ready-to-drink coffee, which again is not alcoholic. All of those were non-alcoholic beverages. I should clarify. Thank you for asking. Yeah, so, and coffee was big because it started from such a small percentage, whereas value-added water reflects, bottled water is huge, and if you remember too, the chart that hit on tap water usage, with the exception of when people are worried about how they're spending their money, rightfully so, they're spending an inordinate amount of money on bottled water where they can just get it for free. Well, they're paying the city or council. Yes. So the short answer is no. You're asking. So this is specific to drinking while driving, and yeah. So no, and to get to the point where the gentleman who I'm pointing at, who's a ghost now, but the point that was really great about the idea of IRIs. Are you still here? Excellent, thank you. So that's something that I'm missing. With the exception of if you wanted to go into police records, we could probably get something about drunk driving, map it. You could do like a heat map based on location, but that gets into kind of an odd gray space because we couldn't necessarily say if it's because that bowling alley overserved or that arcade overserved. I'm sorry, that's probably a bad answer. But an answer? Yes. So there are two things I think that matter most. And if you were to go back to look at data, you can what I included here, as well as what might be able to find online. If we go back to the last recession, so this would have been 2008 through 2010, like in the U.S. and in Canada, even with a number of breweries, this was like the beginning of this explosive growth, actually. If we want to look at the number of breweries, part of that was because there were a lot of stories, this is wholly anecdotal, a lot of stories of people who either left their jobs or were forced out of their jobs and then decided to finally pursue their dream. That is economic related. But in terms of sales and just existence of breweries, like that's where a big upswing starts right to 2015, which is kind of the apex of the American craft beer movement, modern. And then I think a big thing, too, to consider is the way that the demographics of who's buying craft beer. So we're talking about younger consumers who are buying things in a different way than their parents. It's about their connection to a company, the experience, their friends, where they're doing it. Ultimately, and this relates to price, whereas it's not so much about a thing so much as about what that thing provides, which is like this grandiose kind of thing in the ether, but is true. So does there need to be worry about recession and decrease in craft beer buying? Data tells us no. And data says that the way the behavior is right now would not impact that in a way, especially if we look back at the last recession and the lessons that people presumably learned from that too. They've also built an experience for the last 7 to 9 years of buying and experiencing craft beer. So maybe it's not the 15-pack or the $15 6-pack from the brewery down the road. Maybe they're trading to, a few bucks less from somebody else. Thank you for putting up with me. I'm going to hang out. I don't know if you can tell. I like talking about this stuff. So if you want to chat, I'm happy to hang out. We'll do one more, and then thank you so much for sticking around, coming for the first place, and sticking around. It's hard for me probably verbally to express how much it means for you guys to listen to me talk. Thank you so much. One more question, and then we're gonna go party with Heebie-Jeebie. Far right, here we go. Party on the stairs. Should we have a dance fight? We can do that downstairs. Where we got? Okay. Yes, that was an easy one. Yes, it will be available at a time to be determined, of which I'm not entirely sure. But yes, come see me. I'll give you my email, and then if there's something specific you're curious about, I'm happy to send and chat about it with. So maybe we can do. Yes, that was an easy one. Quick.
So as far as the popularity of wines and hard liquors go, do you think it could be partly due to collectability? As craft breweries, we preach that you should drink it fresh, where wineries and distilleries, I feel like, should preach that you should drink it aged. Do you think there's a difference between drinking something now and buying it later?
I don't think the average consumer has any idea what that means. Come chat with me. I'll give you a longer answer. Thank you so much. Thank you, guys.
Now this man has been filling our eggs with knowledge for the last hour. Let's give it up for Bryan, please. Please. It was so interesting how Bryan made multiple references to Bart Watson last year, who naturally came to mind as he was doing his presentation. And it is such a privilege to hear people who can get out of the weeds and give a perspective at 20,000-foot level of what's happening in the industry. We can agree or we can disagree, but I think it's all very valuable. So thank you so much, Bryan.